When we leave, you'll be covered in bruises. Steve said it like a secret sweet nothing, whispered through perfect teeth, one hand draped casually over Amanda's arm, the other stirring his bourbon. To the world watching, they looked like exes rekindling something old. But Amanda's eyes told a different story. Her smile trembled. Her hand never moved. Her body froze the way it always had, trained by fear, not affection. This was just another elegant night at Lestrano, Chicago's finest bar for men like Steve. Those who wore masks made of money, charm, and violence. What Steve didn't realize was that someone was listening. Inches away, Carl Alfano, tattooed, suit-clad, and very much the wrong man to threaten anyone near, heard every word. Would you have noticed the danger buried in that whisper? Carl did. And what he did next rewrote Amanda's entire fate. Before we dive in, where are you watching from, and what kind of story do you want to see next? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this pull you in and don't let go, go ahead, hit subscribe. I have another powerful one coming tomorrow. And you really don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into today's story. The crystal chandeliers of the Emerald Room cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and soft jazz floated through air thick with expensive perfume and lies. Amanda Anthony pressed herself into the leather booth, trying to disappear into the emerald green cushions that matched her jacket. The one Steve had insisted she wear tonight. When we leave, you'll be covered in bruises. Steve Gilmore's whisper barely disturbed the champagne bubbles in his glass. To anyone watching, his smile was tender, his hand on her arm affectionate. No one saw the grip that made her bones ache where old bruises had finally faded. No one heard the promise of violence wrapped in velvet words. You thought you could ignore my calls? He continued, his thumb pressing circles into her wrist that looked like comfort but felt like warnings. Thought you could just move on like I didn't exist? Like what we had meant nothing. Amanda's throat closed around words that wouldn't come anyway. Her untouched martini sweated condensation onto the marble table while her mind cataloged exits she couldn't reach, screams she couldn't voice, help that would never come. Steve was a partner at Henderson and Associates. Respected. Charming. The kind of man who donated to children's hospitals and volunteered at food banks. The kind of man no one would ever believe could hurt someone. That's my girl, Steve murmured when her silence stretched long enough to satisfy him. Always so good at learning your lessons. Remember what happened last time you tried to embarrass me? When you called your little friend Sarah crying. His smile widened. Oh wait, you don't have Sarah anymore, do you? Or Jessica? Or anyone? That's when she noticed the stillness. 2 tables away sat a man who didn't belong in her nightmare, but somehow fit perfectly into it. Expensive black suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Dark hair swept back from a face all sharp angles and harder edges. Tattoos peeked from beneath his cuffs, serpents or vines, she couldn't tell, but what struck her most was the absolute control in his posture. While everyone else in the Emerald Room laughed and clinked glasses and lived normal lives, he sat in perfect, predatory stillness. His whiskey remained untouched. His attention seemingly fixed on nothing. Except Amanda saw the moment his jaw tightened. The way his fingers stopped their idle rotation of the glass. The subtle shift in his shoulders that spoke of violence barely leashed. He'd heard Steve's threat. She was certain of it. Their eyes met for a fraction of a heartbeat. His were dark, nearly black in the low amber light, and held something she couldn't name. Not pity. God, she drowned in enough pity from people who did nothing. This was different. Colder. More dangerous. More like recognition. I need to use the restroom, Steve announced, squeezing her shoulder hard enough to leave fingerprint ghosts in her skin. Don't even think about leaving, Amanda. You know I'll find you. I always do. He pressed a kiss to her temple that made her flinch. And next time, I won't be so forgiving in public. She watched him walk away with that confident swagger that once made her feel protected, but now only promised pain. The moment he disappeared around the corner toward the bathrooms, Amanda's lungs finally remembered how to function. That's when the tattooed man moved. There was no urgency in it. No rushed heroics or dramatic gestures. Just a deliberate, calculated grace that commanded attention without demanding it. He stood, tall, powerfully built beneath that tailored suit, and crossed the distance between their tables in 3 measured steps. When he stopped beside her booth, Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs. Forgive the interruption, he said, his voice low and controlled with an edge of something foreign, Italian maybe, worn smooth by years in America. But I couldn't help overhearing your companion's conversation. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Not in the way Steve was, with his raised voices and sudden movements. This man radiated danger the way ice radiates cold. Silent, absolute, undeniable. Are you here by choice? he asked simply. Amanda opened her mouth, but fear locked her jaw. Who was this man? What did he want? Was this some friend of Steve's, some new game designed to break her further? My name is Carl Alfano, he continued, reading her hesitation with unsettling accuracy. And I make it a point to know when someone is being threatened in my establishment. I own the Emerald Room, along with several other properties in the city. His dark eyes never left hers. I heard what he said to you. Every word. The question is simple. Do you want to leave here safely? Something in his tone, in the way he asked without demanding, offered without expecting, cracked through Amanda's paralysis. In 3 years of hell, no one had ever simply asked what she wanted. They'd told her to leave, told her she deserved better, told her to press charges, get a lawyer, be stronger. But no one had ever offered to help her escape. Not like this. Not from someone who looked like he actually could. Yes, Amanda whispered, the word barely audible over the jazz piano. Please. Carl nodded once, as if that settled everything. He pulled out his phone, typed something with swift efficiency, then slipped it back into his jacket. 2 of my men are positioned at the entrance. When your ex-husband returns, they'll ensure he doesn't approach you. You'll walk out with me. My apartment. He knows where you live. Not a question. A fact delivered with cold certainty. Amanda nodded miserably. Then you won't return there tonight. I'll arrange somewhere safe. I can't afford. You're not paying for anything. Carl cut her off, but there was no harshness in it. Just finality. Now here he comes. Amanda's blood froze as Steve's reflection appeared in the polished marble behind Carl's shoulder. She watched her ex-husband's expression shift from confusion to suspicion to barely concealed rage when he saw the tattooed stranger standing at their booth. Who the hell are you? Steve demanded, his voice carrying just enough edge to sound territorial rather than threatening. Always aware of the audience. Carl turned to face him, and Amanda watched something extraordinary happen. Steve, who had terrorized her for years, who'd made her afraid of her own shadow, actually took half a step backward. I'm the man who heard every word you said to this woman, Carl replied, his tone conversational, but somehow more menacing than any shout could be. I know your name is Steve Gilmore. You're a partner at Henderson and Associates. You drive a black BMW X5, license plate JKM 7743. You live at 1247 Riverside Drive in Lincoln Park. Your mother's name is Catherine, and she lives in Naperville. Steve's face drained of color. How do you? It doesn't matter how I know, Carl interrupted softly. What matters is that you're going to walk out of the Emerald Room right now. And you're never going to contact Amanda again. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits, no flowers, no notes, nothing. Do you understand? You can't just. 2 men materialized at Steve's sides like shadows gaining substance. Both wore dark suits. Both had the kind of presence that made their purpose unmistakable without a single word spoken. I think you should leave, the taller one said quietly. Amanda watched her nightmare unfold in reverse. Steve's eyes darted between the 2 enforcers, then to Carl, then finally to her. And for the first time in 3 years, she saw something on his face she'd never witnessed before. Fear. Real, genuine, bone-deep fear. This isn't over, Steve muttered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Oh, but it is, Carl replied. Gentlemen, escort Mr. Gilmore out. Make certain he understands the importance of maintaining his distance. The 2 men flanked Steve like bookends. He went without resistance, throwing one last look over his shoulder at Amanda. But this time there was no threat in it. Only confusion. Disbelief. Something that almost looked like defeat. Amanda sat frozen, her hands shaking so violently she had to clasp them together. In the span of minutes, her entire world had shifted. The man who'd controlled her through fear and isolation had been reduced to nothing by someone who never even raised his voice. Carl slid into the booth across from her, maintaining careful distance. Are you all right? I don't understand. Amanda's voice cracked. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. I don't need to know you to know that what I heard was wrong, Carl said quietly. No one deserves to be threatened like that, especially not in my establishment. But you, who are you really? Something flickered in those dark eyes, a shadow of old pain, perhaps, or a ghost he'd carried too long. Someone who's seen this before. Someone who didn't act in time once. And I won't make that mistake again. I have nowhere to go, Amanda admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Steve, he made sure I have no one left. No family nearby. No friends anymore. Just my job and an apartment he has keys to. Carl studied her for a long moment, and Amanda had the unsettling sensation that he could see straight through her. understanding more than she'd said aloud, recognizing damage she'd learned to hide. "Then we'll find you somewhere safe for tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. One step at a time. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering." He stood and extended his hand. "Now shall we?" Amanda stared at his outstretched hand. This was insane. She didn't know this man, this Carl Alfano with his expensive suits and tattooed hands and men who appeared out of nowhere. For all she knew, she was trading one dangerous situation for another. But something in her gut, some instinct that had been screaming at her to run for 3 years, suddenly told her to trust. She took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and when he led her toward the exit through the glittering crowd of oblivious diners, Amanda felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like the first green shoot pushing through winter-dead earth. But it was there, real, growing. As they walked past the bar where couples laughed and ordered another round, past the hostess stand where someone's anniversary was being celebrated, past the life she'd been locked out of for so long, Amanda realized her world had just tilted on its axis. She didn't know if it was for better or worse yet. But one thing was absolutely certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Carl Alfano had walked into her nightmare and offered her a way out. Now she just had to be brave enough to take it. The car waiting outside the Emerald Room wasn't what Amanda expected. She'd imagined something ostentatious, maybe a limousine or flashy sports car. Instead, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows sat at the curb, elegant but understated. Professional. The kind of vehicle that didn't draw attention but demanded respect. A driver in a dark suit opened the back door without a word, his expression professionally neutral. Carl gestured for her to enter first. Amanda slid across leather seats that still held the scent of new car and money, her hands trembling slightly. He followed, maintaining that careful distance between them, as if he understood she needed space to process everything that had just shattered and reformed in the span of 20 minutes. The door closed with a soft, final click. "Take us to the Jefferson property," Carl instructed the driver. Then, turning to Amanda, he added, "It's a secure building. The apartment is furnished and vacant. You'll have privacy and safety." Amanda nodded, not trusting her voice. Through the window, she watched Chicago streets slide by, glittering storefronts, couples walking hand in hand, all the normal life she'd been missing while trapped in Steve's web. But as the city lights blurred past, Amanda's mind spiraled backward, back to the beginning, back to when Steve Gilmore had been her dream instead of her nightmare, back to the moment she'd mistaken his attention for love. 3 years earlier, Steve Gilmore had walked into Henderson and Associates' annual charity gala like he owned the room, which in a sense he did. Senior partner at 34. Tailored Tom Ford suit. That smile that made everyone lean in closer, desperate to be part of whatever world he inhabited. Amanda had been serving champagne that night, working for the catering company to pay off her graphic design student loans. She'd expected to be invisible. Staff always were at these events. But Steve had seen her. "You have the most remarkable eyes," he'd said, stopping mid-conversation with a city councilman to speak to her. "Has anyone ever told you they're the exact color of sea glass?" No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Steve did that night, like she was the only person in a room full of Chicago's elite. Within a month, he'd convinced her to quit catering. "You're too talented to be serving drinks," he'd insisted, setting her up with freelance clients from his firm. Within 3 months, they were engaged. Within 6, married in a ceremony that made the society pages. Everyone said she was lucky. Everyone said Steve Gilmore was a catch. And for a while, Amanda believed them. The first bruise came on a Tuesday. Amanda had laughed at something his colleague said at dinner. Just a polite laugh, the kind you give when someone tells a mediocre joke. But later, in their Riverside Drive penthouse, Steve's hand had closed around her wrist. "You think David is funny?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. "You think it's appropriate to flirt with my colleagues?" I wasn't. His grip tightened until her bones felt like they might crack. "Don't interrupt me when I'm talking to you." The next morning, he'd brought her coffee in bed, kissed the purple fingerprints on her wrist, cried, apologized, swore it would never happen again. It happened again the following week, and the week after that, and the week after that. The bruises became a language Amanda learned to speak fluently. Long sleeves in summer, turtlenecks in spring, concealer applied in layers so thick her skin couldn't breathe. Each mark a lesson. Don't talk too much at parties. Don't smile at waiters. Don't have opinions Steve hadn't approved first. Don't exist in any way that might embarrass him. In public, Steve was perfection incarnate. He held doors. bought her extravagant gifts, introduced her as my beautiful wife with such warmth that people envied their relationship. At office functions, he'd rest his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that looked protective but felt like ownership. Behind closed doors, he dismantled her piece by piece. He isolated her systematically. When her best friend Sarah called too often, Steve would rage about people who don't respect boundaries. When Amanda got a freelance project he didn't approve of, he'd sabotage her computer. When she mentioned wanting to visit her parents in Ohio, he'd pick a fight so vicious she'd cancel the trip just to make the screaming stop. By the time she filed for divorce 2 years into the marriage, Amanda had no friends left. No support system. No confidence. Just bruises that had stopped healing and a survival instinct that finally screamed loud enough to be heard. But leaving Steve legally didn't mean she was free. Present day, the sedan. "You're very quiet," Carl observed, his voice pulling Amanda back to the present. They'd been driving for 10 minutes, and she'd been lost in memories that tasted like ash. "I was just thinking," Amanda said softly, "about how I got here. How I let it get this bad." Carl's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in those dark eyes. "You didn't let anything happen. He chose to hurt you. That's on him, not you." Amanda wanted to believe that. She'd read all the articles, heard all the statistics about abuse victims. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different countries separated by an ocean of shame. "After the divorce," she continued, surprised by her own willingness to speak, "I thought it would end. I thought signing papers and moving out would be enough. But Steve," she swallowed hard. "Steve doesn't believe in endings he doesn't control. The calls, the visits, the threats." Carl said it like he already knew. Like he'd seen this script before. "How did you know his address?" Amanda asked suddenly. "His license plate? His mother's name? You knew everything about him in seconds." Carl was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested old wounds. "I have resources. People who find information when I need it found. And I needed to know exactly who was threatening you in my establishment." He paused. "But the truth is, I'd already noticed him." "What?" "Steve Gilmore has been coming to the Emerald Room for months. Always with different women. Always with that same smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Always touching them in ways that looked affectionate but felt wrong." Carl's jaw tightened. "I've been watching him, waiting to see if my instincts were correct." A chill ran down Amanda's spine. "You knew he was dangerous." "I suspected. There's a difference." He turned to face her fully. "But tonight, when I heard what he said to you, suspicion became certainty. And I don't allow men like him to operate freely. Not anymore." "Why?" The question escaped before Amanda could stop it. "Why do you care?" Carl's expression shifted, just a flicker of something raw and painful before the mask returned. "Because I had a sister once, Lucia, and she sat in rooms like that, with men like Steve, while people like me did nothing." The past tense hung heavy in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Amanda whispered. "Don't be sorry. Just be safe." Carl's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back to her. "We're here." The sedan pulled up to a sleek high-rise building in River North. Doorman. Security cameras. The kind of place that screamed money and safety in equal measure. "The apartment on the 15th floor is secure," Carl said as the driver opened the door. "No one knows you're here except me and Marcus. You'll have everything you need." Amanda stepped out onto the sidewalk, the November air sharp against her skin. She turned back to Carl, still seated in the car, and realized something that made her breath catch. He wasn't just helping her. He was hunting Steve. And somehow, that thought didn't scare her nearly as much as it should have. Meanwhile, across town, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Steve Gilmore poured himself 3 fingers of scotch with shaking hands. His phone sat on the marble counter, Amanda's contact information glowing on the screen. He'd tried calling 14 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. Carl Alfano. The name circled in his head like a vulture. Steve had asked around after leaving the Emerald Room, made some calls to contacts who knew Chicago's underbelly. What he learned made his blood run cold. Mobster. Enforcer. The kind of man who made problems disappear. Literally. Steve took a long drink, the scotch burning down his throat. This was just a scare tactic. It had to be. Some overprotective restaurant owner with more muscle than sense. By tomorrow, Amanda would remember who she belonged to. She always did. But as Steve stared at his reflection in the darkened window, he couldn't quite shake the memory of Carl's eyes, cold, calculating, and absolutely certain. For the first time in his life, Steve Gilmore felt hunted. And he had no idea that the trap had already closed. What do you think Carl's next move should be? Drop your predictions in the comments. Do you think he'll confront Steve again or work from the shadows? 5 days later, Amanda's new reality. The apartment Carl had arranged was nothing like Amanda expected. She'd imagined something sterile and temporary, a safe house with bare walls and functional furniture. Instead, the 15th floor unit felt like someone actually lived there. Soft gray couches, bookshelves lined with novels, a kitchen stocked with more than just basics, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Chicago River, where boats glided past like they had nowhere urgent to be. For the first 5 days, Amanda barely left. She'd call in sick to her job at the marketing firm, citing a family emergency. She'd order groceries through an app. She'd exist in this suspended reality where Steve couldn't find her and Carl Alfano's presence lingered like expensive cologne. Invisible but undeniable. On day 6, she returned to work. The morning started normally enough. Amanda took the L train, kept her head down, wore sunglasses even though the November sky was overcast. Old habits. She'd spent so long making herself invisible that visibility felt like standing naked in a spotlight. But when she arrived at Hartman & Associates marketing on the 12th floor of a Wacker Drive building, her manager Rachel intercepted her before she reached her desk. "Amanda, thank God you're back. Are you okay? Your landlord called." Amanda's stomach dropped. "My landlord?" "Yeah, Mr. Patterson from your old building on Ashland. He said there was an incident, something about a restraining order being enforced." Rachel's expression was equal parts concerned and curious. "He wanted to make sure you knew that your ex-husband tried to access your apartment and was removed by building security." Amanda's hands went numb. "When?" 3 days ago. Patterson said the restraining order came through some legal firm. Hang on, I wrote it down." Rachel checked her phone. "Castellano and Associates. They contacted your building management and apparently fast-tracked some kind of emergency protective order. I didn't even know you had filed one." I didn't." The words came out as a whisper. Rachel's eyebrows rose. "Well, someone did. And according to Patterson, your locks have been changed and Steve Gilmore is permanently banned from the premises. Security has his photo." She squeezed Amanda's shoulder. "I'm glad you finally got protection. That man always gave me the creeps at the Christmas party." Amanda nodded mechanically and made her way to her desk in a daze. She hadn't filed a restraining order, hadn't contacted any lawyers, hadn't even been back to her apartment since that night at the Emerald Room. But someone had. Someone was moving pieces on a chessboard she couldn't see. The flowers arrived during her lunch break. Amanda was reviewing marketing copy for a client when the receptionist appeared at her cubicle, carrying a massive arrangement of white lilies. Not roses. Not the generic mixed bouquets Steve used to send as apologies wrapped in petals. Lilies. Stargazer lilies, to be exact. The same flowers she'd mentioned once, to a bartender at the Emerald Room 6 months ago when she'd gone there alone, desperate for somewhere Steve wouldn't think to look for her. She'd been talking to the older bartender, Luis, telling him about her grandmother's garden in Ohio. Lilies were her favorite, Amanda had said, especially stargazers. She said they were flowers that looked up instead of down. Hopeful, you know. Luis had smiled and made her a drink on the house. That had been 6 months ago. One conversation. One random memory shared with a stranger. Amanda's hands trembled as she searched the arrangement for a card. There wasn't one. Just lilies. Perfect, white, impossible lilies. Secret admirer? Rachel asked, passing by with coffee. "I don't know," Amanda replied honestly. But even as she said it, she knew. Somehow she knew. Carl Alfano was watching, protecting, orchestrating, and the thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Meanwhile, Steve's unraveling. Steve Gilmore's office at Henderson & Associates had always been his sanctuary. Corner view, mahogany desk, framed degrees that proved his worth to anyone who walked through the door. This was his kingdom, but kingdoms could crumble. "Mr. Gilmore, your 3 o'clock is here," his assistant Brenda announced through the intercom. Steve barely heard her. He was staring at his phone, at Amanda's contact information, at the 17 unanswered calls from the past 5 days. Every text delivered but unread. Every voicemail ignored. She'd never ignored him before. Even when she'd filed for divorce, even when she'd moved out, Amanda had always answered eventually. Always responded. Because she knew what happened when she didn't. But now, silence. And it was driving him insane. Worse, things were happening. Strange things. His gym membership had been suddenly revoked for inappropriate conduct. A complaint he'd never received. His favorite restaurant claimed they were booked solid for the next 6 months whenever he called. His mother had phoned yesterday, worried because someone from Chicago Legal Services had contacted her asking questions about his relationship with Amanda. Someone was coming for him. He could feel it like a blade against his spine. Carl Alfano's face haunted him. Those cold, calculating eyes. That absolute certainty in his voice. Touch her again, and your funeral won't have a body. Steve had made calls. Asked around. What he'd learned about Carl Alfano made his hands shake when he poured his morning coffee. Organized crime. Money laundering. Businesses throughout Chicago that were almost certainly fronts. And rumors, whispered, unconfirmed rumors, about people who crossed him and simply stopped existing. Mr. Gilmore? Brenda's voice came again, more insistent. Your client is waiting. Cancel it, Steve snapped. Cancel everything today. He needed to think. Needed to figure out how to regain control. Amanda was his. She'd always been his. Some tattooed mobster with delusions of heroism wasn't going to change that. Steve pulled up Amanda's building address on his computer. Maybe if he just showed up, explained things rationally, reminded her of what they'd had. His office door opened without warning. Tom Henderson, the founding partner, stood in the doorway with an expression Steve had never seen directed at him before. Disappointment. Steve, we need to talk about the Northbrook case. What about it? The client fired us. Said you'd been distracted during meetings. Unprofessional. They've retained other counsel. Henderson crossed his arms. That's the third client we've lost this month. What's going on with you? Steve's jaw clenched. Nothing. Just personal stress. It won't happen again. It better not. You're up for equity partner next quarter. This kind of performance doesn't support that trajectory. Henderson's eyes narrowed. Get your head together, Steve. Whatever's happening in your personal life, keep it out of this office. The door closed, leaving Steve alone with rage building in his chest like a pressure cooker. Everything was falling apart, and he knew exactly who to blame. That night, River North. Amanda stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carl's apartment, watching the city lights reflect on the river below. She'd microwaved leftover Thai food and opened a bottle of wine she'd found in the cabinet. It felt surreal, existing in this borrowed space, in this borrowed life. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. How are the flowers? Amanda's breath caught. She stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. How did you know about the lilies? The response came within seconds. I make it my business to know things. Are you safe? Do you need anything? She should be scared. Should be questioning how Carl had access to her work address, how he'd known about a conversation from 6 months ago, how he'd arranged legal protection she hadn't asked for. But instead, Amanda felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Protected. I'm safe. Thank you. For everything. You don't need to thank me. Just stay where you are. Don't go back to your old apartment. Not yet. Why? What's happening? The response took longer this time. When it came, it made her pulse quicken. I'm making sure Steve Gilmore understands that some lessons are permanent. Sleep well, Amanda. You're safe now. The conversation ended there. Amanda set her phone down and returned to the window, watching the city breathe below her. Somewhere out there, Steve was unraveling. Somewhere out there, Carl was orchestrating movements she couldn't see. And somewhere between those two men, one who destroyed her, one who'd chosen to protect her, Amanda was beginning to remember what it felt like to exist without fear. The bruises that didn't show were finally starting to heal. Do you think Amanda should confront Carl about how much he knows, or should she trust the protection he's offering? And what do you think Steve's next desperate move will be? Drop your thoughts below. Carl's office, 2 floors above the Emerald Room. The office existed in contradiction. Exposed brick walls that spoke of Chicago's industrial past. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city Carl had claimed as his territory. A desk made of reclaimed wood that cost more than most people's cars. And in the corner, a single photograph in a silver frame. A young woman with dark hair and Carl's eyes, frozen at 17, smiling at something outside the camera's view. Lucia. Carl sat behind his desk now, fingers steepled, watching surveillance footage on his laptop. The screen showed Steve Gilmore's penthouse building from 3 different angles. Lobby entrance. Underground parking. Service entrance. Every exit covered. Every movement logged. He tried the apartment again last night. Marcus said from where he stood by the window. Carl's right-hand man for 15 years. The only person who'd been there before the Empire, during the building, and through every calculated move since. Building security stopped him at the door. He made a scene. Threatened to call the police about harassment. Did he? No. Because he knows what we'd tell them. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. The surveillance photos from their marriage. The hospital records Amanda never reported. The text messages we recovered from her old phone. The ones where he describes in detail what he planned to do to her. Carl's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Good. What else? His partners at the law firm are getting nervous. 3 major clients gone in 2 weeks. His billable hours are down 40%. Tom Henderson pulled him into a closed-door meeting yesterday. Our contact says it wasn't friendly. Marcus paused. We've also frozen his access to the offshore accounts. He doesn't know it yet, but as of this morning, he's got about 60 days before his financial world collapses. Make it 45. Marcus nodded, making a note. Then he looked up, his expression softer than usual. This is personal for you. It wasn't a question. Carl was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the photograph in the corner. Lucia at 17, wearing their mother's necklace, laughing at something Carl had said. That picture had been taken 3 months before she died. Do you remember when we found her? Carl asked quietly. Marcus's expression darkened. Yes. 15 years earlier, the memory. Carl had been 25, already building his reputation in Chicago's underworld. Making connections. Proving himself. Learning that power wasn't about violence. It was about knowing when to apply pressure and when to simply watch. His sister Lucia had been 22. An art student at the School of the Art Institute. Beautiful. Talented. In love with a man named David Corso, who worked in finance and wore expensive suits and said all the right things to their mother at Sunday dinners. Carl had seen through him immediately. Recognized the predator beneath the polish. But Lucia wouldn't listen. She was in love. She was happy. She told Carl to stop being so paranoid, so controlling, so unable to trust her judgment. So Carl had backed off. Watched from a distance. Told himself that maybe he was wrong. Maybe David was exactly who he appeared to be. Until the night Marcus called him, at 2 a.m. They'd found Lucia in her apartment. Overdose, the police said. Tragic accident. A young woman with no history of drug use suddenly dead from a lethal combination of pills and alcohol. But Carl had seen the bruises. Weeks old, carefully hidden. He'd found the threatening texts David had deleted from her phone. He'd talked to neighbors who'd heard screaming through the walls, but never called the police because it seemed private. The system had ruled it an accidental death. Case closed. David Corso walked away without even a question asked. Carl had made sure David disappeared 6 months later. Permanently. It didn't bring Lucia back. Nothing could. But it taught Carl a lesson he'd never forgotten. The system only protected people who could afford protection. Everyone else, they were on their own. Unless someone like Carl decided to intervene. Present day Carl's office. I see Lucia every time I look at Amanda, Carl said, still staring at the photograph. The way she tries to make herself smaller. The way she flinches when someone moves too quickly. The way she apologizes for existing. Amanda isn't Lucia, Marcus said carefully. No, Amanda gets to live. Carl's voice was cold steel wrapped in velvet. Because this time I saw it happening. This time, I'm not going to stand back and tell myself it's not my business. He pulled up another screen on his laptop. Security footage from the Emerald Room, dated the night he'd first intervened. Carl watched his past self sitting at the bar, seemingly focused on his whiskey. But the angle of his head showed exactly what he'd been listening to. Steve's voice came through the audio, that sickening whisper. When we leave, you'll be covered in bruises. Carl had made the decision in that instant. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Just cold, calculated certainty. He'd pulled out his phone while Steve was in the bathroom. Sent 3 texts. Within 20 minutes, he had Steve's full background. Home address. Work history. Financial records. Every parking ticket. Every complaint filed against him. The hospital visit Amanda had made 2 years ago with a broken wrist she'd claimed came from a fall. Within 48 hours, Carl had a complete surveillance package. Steve's routines. His patterns. His weaknesses. You remember what you told me that night? Marcus asked. When you ordered the full workup on Gilmore? Carl did. He remembered exactly. No one touches what's defenseless, not if I can see it. It had been his rule since Lucia died. The principle that guided every decision. He wasn't a hero. Wasn't pretending to be. Carl Alfano was a criminal who'd built an empire on fear and calculated violence. He'd hurt people. Disappeared people. Done things that would send him to prison for life if the law ever caught up to him. But he had one line he never crossed. One rule that superseded everything else. He didn't allow predators to hunt without consequence. Not anymore. Not ever again. Amanda doesn't know about Lucia, Marcus observed. She doesn't need to. Carl closed the laptop. This isn't about making Amanda grateful. It's about making sure Steve Gilmore understands that his ability to hurt people has ended. He's getting desperate. Desperate men do stupid things. I'm counting on it. Carl stood, adjusting his cufflinks. When he makes his move, and he will, I want every second documented. Video, audio, witnesses if possible. I want enough evidence to bury him legally if we need to. And if the legal route doesn't work? Carl's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. Then we handle it the other way. But I want Amanda to see justice done. Real justice. Not the half measures the system offers women like her. Marcus nodded slowly. You know she's going to figure it out eventually. That you're behind all of this. Yes. And when she asks why, Carl looked at Lucia's photograph one more time. At the sister who'd begged for help in ways he'd been too young and stupid to recognize. At the woman who'd died because he hadn't acted when he should have. I'll tell her the truth, Carl said quietly. That I failed to save someone once. And I've spent 15 years making sure I never fail again. Across town, Steve's breaking point. Steve's hands shook as he poured his fourth scotch of the night. The penthouse felt like a cage. Every window a potential surveillance point. Every phone call possibly monitored. Every move he made observed by invisible eyes. He'd tried calling Amanda 18 more times today. All sent straight to voicemail. He'd driven past her old apartment. Security had physically blocked him from entering. He'd even shown up at her work, only to be stopped by building security, who claimed there was a restraining order on file. A restraining order he'd never been served with. His lawyer said it was impossible. You couldn't enforce a restraining order without proper service. But somehow, Carl Alfano had made the impossible happen. Steve stared at his reflection in the darkened window. He looked haunted. Hunted. Like prey that could feel the predator circling, but couldn't see it coming. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against every instinct, he answered. Hello, Mr. Gilmore. The voice was unfamiliar. Calm. Professional. Mr. Alfano wanted you to know that he's been watching. And he'll continue watching. Every move you make. Every threat you consider. Every time you even think about Amanda Anthony. You can't. We can. We are. And if you continue to pursue her, you won't just lose your career. You'll lose everything. A pause. This is your only warning. Walk away. The line went dead. Steve hurled his phone across the room, watching it shatter against exposed brick. Rage and fear warred in his chest, creating a toxic combination that made his vision blur. No one threatened Steve Gilmore. No one. Carl Alfano thought he was untouchable? Thought he could steal what belonged to Steve. He'd learn differently. What do you think Carl would do if he knew Steve was planning retaliation? And do you think Amanda deserves to know the truth about Lucia? Share your thoughts. 10 days after the Emerald Room. Amanda stood outside the entrance to the Emerald Room, her hand hovering over the brass door handle. She'd walked past twice already, building courage, reminding herself that Steve didn't own this place. Didn't own her fear anymore. The November wind cut through her coat, but she barely felt it. For 10 days, she'd been living in Carl's apartment, sleeping through nights without nightmares, eating meals without her stomach churning with dread. For 10 days, she'd existed in a reality where Steve's shadow didn't follow her everywhere. And tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Amanda wanted to walk into a beautiful place simply because she could. She pulled the door open. The familiar warmth enveloped her immediately. Crystal chandeliers cast their amber glow across white tablecloths. Soft jazz drifted through air perfumed with expensive wine and seared scallops. Couples leaned close over candlelight, oblivious to the miracle happening in Amanda's chest. Her hands weren't shaking. For the first time in years, her hands were completely still. Good evening, miss, the hostess said with a professional smile. Table for one? Just the bar, please. Amanda made her way through the dining room, hyper-aware of every glance, every movement. But nobody stared. Nobody whispered. She was just another woman in a green blouse and dark jeans, walking toward the bar like she belonged there. Because she did belong there. Luis was working tonight, the older bartender with kind eyes and graying temples who'd listened to her ramble about Lily's 6 months ago. He looked up as she approached, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe understanding. Welcome back, he said simply, setting down a cocktail napkin. What can I get you? White wine, please. Whatever you recommend. While Luis poured a crisp Sauvignon Blanc, Amanda let herself breathe. Really breathe. The kind of deep, unrestricted breath that filled lungs that had forgotten they were allowed to expand fully. Steve wasn't here. Wasn't watching. wasn't waiting to punish her for the crime of existing in public without his permission. "You look different," Luis observed, sliding the wine across the bar. "Lighter, maybe." Amanda smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I feel different." She sipped her wine and watched the dining room in the bar's mirror. Saw couples laughing. Saw a woman alone reading a book over dinner. Saw a group of friends celebrating something, their joy uncomplicated and pure. This was what normal looked like. What life looked like when fear wasn't the baseline. After her second glass of wine, Amanda asked Luis for a pen. He provided one without question, along with a fresh cocktail napkin. She stared at the blank white square for a long moment, trying to find words adequate for what she needed to say. Finally, she wrote simply, "Thank you, whoever you are. You gave me my life back." She folded the napkin carefully and slid it across the bar. "Could you? I know this sounds strange, but could you give this to your boss? To Mr. Alfano?" Luis's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Understanding. Of course. Thank you." Amanda finished her wine, left cash for the bill plus a generous tip, and stood. She felt weightless, untethered from the anchor of terror that had dragged her down for so long. As she walked out of the Emerald Room into the cold November night, Amanda realized she was humming. Quietly, unconsciously. A song she'd loved before Steve, before the Bruises, before she'd learned to make herself invisible. She was remembering who she used to be. And for the first time, she believed she might become that person again. Later that night, Carl's office. Carl was reviewing financial reports when Luis knocked on his office door at 11:47 p.m. The older bartender had worked for Carl for 12 years and knew better than to interrupt unless it was important. "Come in." Luis entered, holding a folded cocktail napkin. "The woman from last week. Amanda. She came back tonight." Carl's attention sharpened immediately. "Was there a problem?" "No. The opposite." Luis crossed to the desk and set down the napkin. "She asked me to give you this." Carl stared at the folded paper for a moment before picking it up. He unfolded it carefully, reading the message written in neat, slightly shaky handwriting. "Thank you, whoever you are. You gave me my life back." Something shifted in Carl's chest. Not quite emotion. He'd learned to bury those too deep for casual excavation, but something close to it. A recognition of impact. Of mattering in a way that had nothing to do with fear or power or control. She seemed happy, Luis added quietly. Peaceful. Like she could finally breathe. Carl read the note again. Then a third time. The words were simple, but their weight was profound. Amanda didn't know about the surveillance teams. The frozen accounts. The legal maneuvering. The systematic dismantling of Steve Gilmore's ability to hurt her. She just knew that someone had seen her. Really seen her. And had chosen to help. "Thank you, Luis," Carl said finally. "That will be all." After the bartender left, Carl sat alone in his office, the napkin still in his hands. He thought about Lucia. About the note she'd left before she died. The one the police had dismissed as a rambling suicide letter, but Carl knew was a cry for help he'd ignored too long. "I just want someone to see me. Really see me. Not what he wants everyone to think I am." Carl had failed Lucia. But he hadn't failed Amanda. He folded the napkin carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the photograph of his sister. Some victories were measured in empire expansion and territory claimed. Others were measured in cocktail napkins and women who could finally walk into a restaurant without their hands shaking. Tonight, Carl would count this as a victory. Steve's penthouse, simultaneously. Steve Gilmore stared at his laptop screen, rage building like a pressure system before a storm. The email from his bank was impossible. Completely impossible. "Dear Mr. Gilmore, due to suspicious activity flagged by federal regulators, your accounts ending in 7743 and 8821 have been temporarily frozen pending investigation. Please contact our fraud department for additional information." He'd called the fraud department 3 times. They claimed they had no record of any investigation. Claimed it must be an error. Claimed they'd resolve it within 5 to 7 business days. But Carl's people had to be behind this. Had to be. His offshore accounts, the ones even his partners didn't know about, were inaccessible. His primary checking account was frozen. His credit cards were maxed from the legal fees he'd been racking up trying to fight the phantom restraining order that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. And Amanda. God, Amanda was completely unreachable. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was a fortress. Her workplace had security protocols that appeared overnight. Even her parents in Ohio claimed they hadn't heard from her when he'd called them, which he knew was a lie. Someone was systematically erasing his access to everything. His money, His influence. His control. Steve poured another scotch with shaking hands. The penthouse that had once felt like a palace now felt like a tomb. Every shadow held potential surveillance. Every phone call might be monitored. Every move he made was probably being watched and documented and used against him. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He'd stopped answering them after the fourth threatening call from Carl's people. But this time, curiosity and rage won out. What? Steve Gilmore. A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. This is Margaret Shin from Henderson and Associates HR. We need to schedule a meeting regarding several complaints that have been filed against you. His blood ran cold. What complaints? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I need you to come in tomorrow at 9 a.m. for a formal review. Bring representation if you'd like. This is bullshit. Someone's setting me up. 9 a.m., Mr. Gilmore. Don't be late. The line went dead. Steve hurled his glass against the wall, watching it shatter, watching scotch drip down the exposed brick like amber blood. Everything was falling apart. His career, his money, his control, his entire carefully constructed life was crumbling, and he couldn't even see who was demolishing it. But he knew. Carl Alfano, that tattooed mobster with his quiet threats and unlimited resources. He was behind everything, and he'd made one critical mistake. He'd shown Steve exactly how much he cared about Amanda, which meant Steve knew exactly how to hurt him back. If he couldn't have Amanda, he'd make sure Carl's protection meant nothing. He'd find her, corner her, remind her that she belonged to him and always would. And Carl Alfano would learn that Steve Gilmore didn't surrender. Ever. Steve grabbed his car keys. It was time to stop being hunted and start hunting back. Do you think Steve's desperation will lead him into a trap Carl's already set? Or will he actually manage to find Amanda? And should Amanda be warned about what's coming? Drop your predictions. The Emerald Room, 11:32 p.m. Carl was finishing a conversation with his accountant when Marcus appeared at his side, expression tight with controlled urgency. We have a problem. Steve Gilmore just walked through the front door. Carl's hand stilled on his whiskey glass. Alone. Yes. Drunk. Angry. And asking for you by name. Carl set down his glass with deliberate precision. Around them, the Emerald Room hummed with its usual late-night energy. Soft conversations, clinking glasses, jazz piano weaving through laughter. None of the patrons noticed the shift in atmosphere, the way Carl's security team subtly repositioned themselves throughout the room. But Carl noticed everything. Let him come, Carl said quietly. But have everyone ready. If he makes a scene, I want him removed before any guests are disturbed. Marcus nodded and spoke into his wrist mic, barely audible. Within seconds, 4 men in dark suits had positioned themselves at strategic points around the bar. Carl remained seated at his usual table near the back, the one that allowed him to see every entrance and exit. He adjusted his cufflinks, Italian silk, custom-made, and waited. Steve Gilmore appeared moments later. He looked like a man unraveling in real time. His suit was expensive but rumpled. His tie loosened. Hair disheveled in a way that spoke of hands run through it too many times. His eyes carried the manic gleam of someone who'd crossed the line from anger into something more dangerous. Desperation. Steve's gaze locked onto Carl, and he strode across the dining room with the false confidence of someone who'd had too much to drink and not enough sense. Other diners glanced up, sensing disruption, before quickly looking away. You, Steve snarled, loud enough to turn heads. You're Carl Alfano. Carl remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. I am. And you're drunk and making a scene in my establishment. I suggest you leave. I suggest you stay the fuck away from Amanda. Steve planted his hands on Carl's table, leaning forward aggressively. Up close, the smell of scotch rolled off him in waves. I know what you've been doing. The restraining orders, the frozen accounts, the surveillance, all of it. Then you understand that you're finished, Carl replied, his voice barely above a conversational tone. And yet you're still here, which suggests you're either very brave or very stupid. I'm not afraid of you. But Steve's voice carried a tremor that betrayed the lie. Carl took a slow sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. You should be. You think you can just swoop in and play hero? Steal my wife. Ex-wife, Carl corrected softly. And I didn't steal anyone. I simply ensured she had the option to leave safely. Something you made impossible through years of systematic abuse. Steve's face flushed crimson. You don't know anything about my relationship with Amanda. I know everything. Carl set down his glass. I know about the hospital visit in 2023 when she claimed the broken wrist came from a fall. I know about the texts you deleted threatening to kill her if she told anyone. I know about the time you locked her in your penthouse for 3 days because she smiled at a waiter. Steve's eyes widened. How? I make it my business to know, Carl said. Especially when predators operate in my city. And you, Mr. Gilmore, are a predator. A coward who terrorizes someone weaker because it makes you feel powerful. Fuck you. Steve's hands curled into fists on the table. You're just some thug in an expensive suit. You think you're better than me? You're a criminal. Everyone knows what you really are. Carl's expression didn't change, but something dark and deadly flickered behind his eyes. Around them, his security team closed in imperceptibly, ready to intervene. You're right, Carl said quietly. I am exactly what people say I am. I've hurt people, disappeared people, done things that would send me to prison for life if the law ever caught up. He leaned forward slightly. Which is why you should be terrified right now. Because you're standing in front of a man who has no moral objections to violence, and you've done something that offends me on a fundamental level. Steve swallowed hard but didn't back down. You can't touch me. I'm a partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. I have connections, resources. If anything happens to me, you'll have disappeared, Carl finished. And no one will look very hard. Your partners already know you're a liability. Your mother suspects what you are, but chooses not to see it. Your friends. Do you even have friends, Steve? Or just people you've bullied into pretending they like you? The color drained from Steve's face. Carl stood slowly, and despite being roughly the same height, he somehow seemed to tower over Steve. The tattoos on his hands, serpents intertwined with thorns, seemed to writhe in the amber light. Here's what's going to happen, Carl said, his voice dropping to a register that carried absolute authority. You're going to walk out of the Emerald Room. You're going to stop calling Amanda. Stop driving past her apartment. Stop trying to destroy the life she's building without you. And if I don't? Steve's bravado was crumbling, but he clung to the last shreds of it desperately. Carl moved closer, invading Steve's space with calculated precision. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but every word landed like a physical blow. Touch her again, even think about touching her, and your funeral won't have a body. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jazz piano seemed to fade into nothing. Steve's face had gone chalk white. His hands trembled where they still rested on the table. For the first time in his life, Steve Gilmore was facing something he couldn't charm, couldn't manipulate, couldn't bully into submission. He was facing someone more dangerous than he could ever hope to be. You can't. Steve's voice came out strangled. I can. I will. Carl's expression remained perfectly calm, but death lived in his eyes. The only question is whether you're smart enough to walk away right now, or whether you need a more permanent lesson. Marcus appeared at Steve's elbow, along with 2 other security personnel. Mr. Gilmore, it's time for you to leave. Steve looked wildly between them, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. His bravado had evaporated completely, leaving behind only the terrified realization of how badly he'd miscalculated. This isn't over, Steve muttered, but the words carried no conviction. Yes, Carl said softly. It is. You just don't know it yet. Marcus and the security team guided Steve toward the exit. He went without resistance this time, his swagger replaced by the stumbling gait of a man whose world had just inverted. As he reached the door, he threw one last look back at Carl. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. Pure, primal fear. The door closed behind him, and the Emerald Room slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Laughter bubbled up. The jazz pianist transitioned into a Cole Porter standard. Carl returned to his seat and picked up his whiskey as if nothing had happened. Think he'll actually stay away? Marcus asked quietly. Carl took a slow sip, his eyes distant. No. Men like Steve Gilmore don't know when to quit. They push and push until someone breaks them completely. And when he pushes again, then we finish this. Carl's jaw tightened. But I want Amanda protected. Double the surveillance on her building. Have someone watching her work. If Steve gets within 100 feet of her, I want to know immediately. Already done. Carl nodded, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Steve had been warned, had been given a chance to walk away. Most men would have taken it. But Carl had seen the rage beneath Steve's fear. The entitled fury of a man who'd never been told no and couldn't accept that someone, something, had been taken from his possession. Steve would come back. And when he did, Carl would be ready. He'd failed Lucia by hesitating, by hoping the system would protect her. He wouldn't fail Amanda. Not even if it meant adding another ghost to the collection that haunted his dreams. Outside the Emerald Room, Steve leaned against his car, hands shaking so badly he couldn't get the key in the ignition. Sweat dripped down his back despite the November cold. His heart hammered like it was trying to escape his chest. Carl Alfano's eyes. God, those eyes. Like looking into an abyss that looked back and found you wanting. Your funeral won't have a body. Steve believed him. Completely. But as the fear slowly transformed back into rage, because rage was familiar, rage was safe, a thought crystallized in his alcohol-soaked mind. Carl had shown his hand, had revealed exactly how much he cared about protecting Amanda, which meant Amanda was Carl's weakness. And Steve knew exactly how to exploit weakness. Do you think Carl's threat will be enough to stop Steve, or has he just made things more dangerous for Amanda? And what would you do if you were in Amanda's position right now? Let me know your thoughts. 3 days later, River North apartment. Amanda stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee mug warming her hands, watching the city wake up below. The sunrise painted the Chicago River in shades of amber and rose gold, and for the first time in years, she felt present enough to appreciate beauty. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, Carl's right-hand man who'd become her unexpected point of contact. Mr. Alfano would like to speak with you. The Emerald Room, 2 p.m. today. Just coffee. Your choice entirely. Amanda stared at the message for a long moment. In the 2 weeks since Carl had intervened, she'd existed in this strange liminal space, protected but distant, saved but not connected. She knew Carl was behind everything. The apartment, the restraining order, the frozen accounts that Marcus had accidentally mentioned and then tried to walk back. But she hadn't seen Carl since that night, hadn't spoken to him directly. He'd orchestrated her entire rescue from the shadows, like a phantom who rearranged reality but never showed his face. Amanda typed back, "I'll be there." She had questions, deserved answers, and maybe finally she was brave enough to ask for them. The Emerald Room, 2:07 p.m. The lunch rush had ended, leaving the Emerald Room in that quiet afternoon lull where staff reset tables and the jazz pianist took a break. Amanda walked in wearing jeans and a cream sweater, comfortable clothes, not the armor she used to wear around Steve. Carl sat at a corner table, dressed in charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing more of the intricate tattoos that wrapped around his forearms. He looked different in daylight, less like a dangerous myth and more like a man who carried heavy burdens with practiced ease. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of respect that caught Amanda off guard. "Thank you for coming," Carl said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Amanda admitted, sitting down. A pot of coffee and 2 cups already waited on the table. "But I needed to ask you something." "Ask anything." Luis appeared briefly to pour coffee, then disappeared with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew when to make himself scarce. Amanda wrapped her hands around the warm cup, gathering courage. She'd spent 3 days rehearsing this conversation in her head, but now that Carl sat across from her, real, solid, watching her with those impossibly dark eyes, the practiced words evaporated. So she asked the only question that mattered. "Why me?" Carl didn't look away, didn't deflect or minimize. He simply held her gaze with an intensity that felt like being truly seen for the first time in years. "Because no one else saw what I did," he said quietly. "And because you deserved someone in your corner. But you don't know me," Amanda pressed, leaning forward. "You don't owe me anything. And from what I've gathered, what you've done, the apartment, the legal protection, whatever you did to Steve, it's not small. It's not casual. So why?" Carl was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that spoke of old wounds. "I had a sister, Lucia. She was brilliant, kind. She saw beauty in everything." He paused. "She was also in a relationship with a man who hurt her. Systematically. Brutally. The same way Steve hurt you." Amanda's breath caught. "I knew something was wrong," Carl continued. "But I didn't know how wrong. I was young, building my business. I told myself she was an adult, that she'd come to me if she really needed help. I respected her space, her choices." His jaw tightened. "And then one night, I got a call that she was dead. Overdose, they said. Accident." "Carl, it wasn't an accident," he said flatly. Her boyfriend had been feeding her pills to keep her compliant. And when she finally tried to leave, he made sure she couldn't. The system called it accidental death and moved on. No investigation. No justice. Just another young woman erased because no one was watching closely enough. Tears stung Amanda's eyes. "I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy," Carl said, meeting her gaze again. "I'm telling you because after Lucia died, I made myself a promise. No one touches what's defenseless, not if I can see it, not if I have the power to stop it. But I'm not your sister. No. But you were sitting in my restaurant while a predator threatened you in public, counting on the fact that no one would intervene, that no one would believe you over him, that the system would fail you the same way it failed Lucia. Carl's voice hardened, and I decided that wasn't going to happen. Not this time. Amanda set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. You didn't do this because you know me. You did it because of who you couldn't save. Yes, Carl didn't flinch from the truth. But that doesn't make your safety less important. It doesn't make what Steve did to you less real, or your right to live without fear less valid. I don't know how to thank you for. Don't, Carl interrupted gently. You don't owe me gratitude. You don't owe me anything. What I did because it was right. Because I had the means to help and chose to use them. Amanda studied him across the table. This man who'd built an empire in the shadows, who'd done things she probably didn't want to know about, who had enough power to dismantle Steve's life with a few phone calls. He wasn't asking for anything in return. Wasn't expecting her to be grateful or compliant or anything except safe. It was the most profound gift anyone had ever given her. Can I ask you something else? Amanda said. Yes. What happened to the man who hurt Lucia? Carl's expression didn't change, but something cold and final flickered in his eyes. He's no longer a concern. Amanda understood, and instead of being horrified, she felt a dark sense of justice settle in her chest. Steve came to the Emerald Room 3 nights ago, Carl continued. Drunk, angry, looking for confrontation. Amanda's blood went cold. What did he do? Nothing that matters. I made it clear that his ability to hurt you has ended. That if he comes near you again, the consequences will be permanent. Do you think he'll listen? Carl hesitated, and in that hesitation, Amanda saw the truth. I think Steve is a man who's never been told no, Carl said carefully. And men like that don't surrender easily. Which is why I have people watching him. Watching you. Making sure that if he makes a move, we know about it immediately. I'm still being protected. You'll always be protected, Carl said simply. Until Steve Gilmore is no longer a threat, or until you tell me to stop. Your choice. Amanda absorbed this. The apartment. The surveillance. The invisible shield Carl had placed around her life. It should have felt suffocating. Controlling. Like trading one cage for another. But it didn't. Because Carl was offering protection without possession. Safety without ownership. He wasn't asking her to be grateful or compliant or anything except willing to accept help. I spent 3 years believing I deserved what Steve did to me, Amanda said quietly. That I was weak for not leaving sooner. Stupid for loving him in the first place. That somehow, I'd brought it on myself. None of that is true. I'm starting to believe that, Amanda admitted. Because of you. Because someone saw what was happening and decided I was worth saving. She met Carl's eyes. So thank you. Not because I owe you, but because you gave me something I'd forgotten I deserved. What's that? The chance to remember I'm human. That I matter. That I'm not just something to be used and discarded. Her voice strengthened. You gave me my life back, Carl. And I'm going to make sure I actually live it this time. Something softened in Carl's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. That's all I wanted to hear. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee while afternoon light slanted through the Emerald Room's windows. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual chaos. But inside this small bubble of peace, Amanda felt something shift inside her chest. She was still healing. Still learning to exist without fear. Still figuring out who she was when she wasn't trying to survive. But for the first time in years, Amanda believed she was worth the effort. And that belief, fragile and new as it was, felt like the beginning of everything. Across town, Steve's car. Steve sat in his BMW 3 blocks from Amanda's workplace, binoculars trained on the building's entrance. He'd been here for 2 hours, watching, waiting, learning her patterns. Carl thought he could protect her forever. Thought his threats and surveillance and money would keep Steve away. But Carl had made one critical mistake. He'd shown Steve exactly how much Amanda meant to him. And Steve knew that the best way to hurt Carl Alfano was to take away the one thing he thought he'd saved. Steve pulled out his phone and made a call. Yeah, it's me. I need information on Carl Alfano's operation. Security protocols. Surveillance blind spots. Everything. A pause. I don't care what it costs. Just get it done. He ended the call and smiled. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Do you think Amanda is finally ready to stand on her own, or will she need Carl's protection a little longer? And what do you think Steve is planning? Drop your theories below. 4 days later, Henderson and Associates. The receptionist at Henderson and Associates noticed it first. Steve Gilmore hadn't shown up for the morning partners meeting. No call. No email. No text to his assistant Brenda explaining the absence. For a man who prided himself on punctuality and control, the silence was deafening. By noon, Tom Henderson stood in Steve's office, staring at an empty desk. Coffee mug abandoned mid-sip, ring stain still visible on legal documents. Computer locked. Chair pushed back at an angle, as if Steve had stood up intending to return but never did. "Has anyone heard from him?" Henderson asked Brenda. She shook her head, worry creasing her forehead. "Nothing since yesterday afternoon. He had a 4 p.m. with the Northbrook client, but he never showed. They called 3 times. I've been trying his cell all morning, straight to voicemail." Henderson pulled out his phone and dialed Steve's number himself. 5 rings. Then voicemail. "You've reached Steve Gilmore. Leave a message." But something felt wrong. Henderson couldn't name it, but 30 years practicing law had taught him to trust his instincts. Steve Gilmore hadn't just missed a meeting. He'd vanished. Steve's penthouse, that evening. The building manager used his master key after Henderson called, concerned about a wellness check. The penthouse door swung open to reveal absolute stillness. No struggle. No blood. No signs of forced entry. Just absence. Steve's laptop sat closed on the kitchen counter. His phone, the one going straight to voicemail, lay face down beside it, battery dead. His BMW keys hung on the hook by the door. Wallet on the nightstand. Watch. Wedding ring he still wore despite the divorce. Everything that made Steve Gilmore identifiable remained. But Steve himself? Gone. The closet held expensive suits on hangers, dress shoes lined up with military precision. The refrigerator hummed with food that would spoil. Mail lay unopened on the marble table, bills, solicitations, a letter from his mother. It was as if Steve had simply stopped existing mid-thought. The building manager called the police. They came, looked around, took notes. No signs of foul play. No evidence of kidnapping. Just a successful lawyer who'd apparently walked away from his entire life without taking so much as a toothbrush. Maybe he had a breakdown, one officer suggested. High-stress job, recent divorce. Happens more than you'd think. They filed a missing persons report and left. But the building's security footage told a stranger story. Steve had walked into the underground parking garage at 11:47 p.m. 4 nights ago. Alone. Sober, based on his gait. He'd approached his BMW, keys in hand. And then the cameras glitched. Just 3 seconds of static. When the feed resumed, Steve's car sat undisturbed in its spot. But Steve was gone. Amanda's apartment, the same night. Amanda woke at 2 a.m. from a dreamless sleep, the kind of deep, restorative rest she hadn't experienced in years. No nightmares. No phantom sounds of Steve's key in a lock that had been changed. No panic about whether tomorrow would be the day he finally made good on his threats. Just silence. She padded to the kitchen, poured water, stood at the window watching Chicago's nighttime skyline. Her phone sat charging on the counter, screen dark and peaceful. No missed calls. No threatening texts. No voicemails that started with "Amanda, we need to talk," and ended with promises of violence. Something had shifted in the air. She couldn't name it, couldn't explain it. But Steve's presence, that suffocating weight that had pressed against her chest for 3 years, had simply lifted. Amanda returned to bed and slept until morning. For the first time since meeting Steve Gilmore, her hands didn't shake when she reached for her coffee. The Emerald Room, Carl's office. Carl sat in darkness, the only light coming from the city beyond his windows. Lucia's photograph rested in his hands, the silver frame catching ambient glow from the street below. She smiled at him from 17 years in the past. Frozen. Perfect. Forever untouched by the man who'd killed her. "One more," Carl whispered to the image. "One more monster off the board." The door opened without knocking. Only Marcus had that privilege. "It's done," Marcus said simply. "Clean. Complete. He'll never be found." Carl nodded slowly, setting Lucia's photograph back on his desk with reverent care. Witnesses. None that matter. Security footage corrupted. Phone records scrubbed. Financial trail erased. Marcus paused. He stopped being a person 4 nights ago. Now he's just a statistic. Another man who walked away from his life. The police filed a missing persons report. No signs of foul play, so they're treating it as a voluntary disappearance. His mother will grieve. His law firm will redistribute his cases. And in 6 months, people will barely remember his name. Carl stood, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. The tattoos on his hands, serpents and thorns, seemed to writhe in the low light. And Amanda? Hasn't asked a single question. Hasn't filed a police report. Hasn't even checked the news. Marcus's expression softened slightly. She's sleeping through the night now. Our surveillance team says she looks peaceful. Good. Carl moved to the window, staring out at his city. That's all that matters. Do you think she knows? She knows enough. Carl's reflection in the glass was calm, unreadable. She knows Steve is gone. She knows she's safe. The details beyond that? She's smart enough not to ask for them. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, was it worth it? The risk. Carl thought about Lucia. About the funeral where he'd stood stone-faced while their mother wept. About the system that had failed her, the police who'd called it an accident, the man who'd walked away without consequence. Until Carl had made sure he didn't. One less predator in the world, Carl said quietly. One woman who gets to sleep without fear. Yes, Marcus. It was worth it. He turned from the window, his decision made and settled like stone. Reduce Amanda's surveillance to perimeter only. Give her space to heal. But keep eyes on her street, her workplace. If anyone even remotely threatening approaches her, I want to know immediately. Understood. Marcus left as silently as he'd arrived. Carl remained alone with Lucia's photograph and the ghost of Steve Gilmore, erased as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. Not justice by law, but justice nonetheless. And in a city where monsters wore expensive suits and hid behind respectability, sometimes the only real justice came from someone willing to become a monster himself. Carl picked up his phone and sent a single text to Amanda. You're safe now. Sleep well. He didn't expect a response. Didn't need one. 3 floors below, the Emerald Room filled with laughter and jazz, and people living lives uncomplicated by fear. And somewhere in River North, Amanda Anthony slept through the night. Mission accomplished. Do you think Amanda suspects what really happened to Steve? And how do you feel about the kind of justice Carl delivered? Was it right, or did he cross a line? Share your thoughts below. 6 weeks later, November rain. The rain started as Amanda left work, soft and persistent, turning Chicago's streets into mirrors that reflected neon and headlights in liquid gold. She stood under the awning of the Hartman and Associates building, watching office workers scatter like drops themselves. Some running for the L, others hailing cabs, a few brave souls simply accepting the weather and walking into it. Amanda pulled her coat tighter and smiled. 6 weeks ago, rain would have meant vulnerability, reduced visibility, slower reaction time if Steve appeared from nowhere. Every weather pattern had been a tactical consideration in the war of her daily survival. But tonight, rain was just rain. Beautiful, cleansing, ordinary rain. She stepped off the curb and started walking. Her new apartment, the one she'd found herself, signed the lease for herself, furnished with her own money from the promotion Rachel had given her, was only 8 blocks away. Close enough to walk. Far enough to feel like freedom. The city hummed around her with its usual November energy. Restaurants glowed warm against the cold. A street musician played saxophone under a covered doorway, his notes drifting through the rain like smoke. Couples huddled together, laughing as they dodged puddles. Normal life. The kind Amanda had forgotten existed. She passed the coffee shop where she'd started going for morning lattes. The bookstore where she'd bought 3 novels last week. The first books she'd read for pleasure in 3 years. The corner where she sometimes stopped to pet a neighbor's golden retriever. These were her places now. Her routines. Her life. Not Steve's. Not anyone else's. Hers. The black car. Amanda noticed it on 5th Street, parked between a delivery van and a Tesla. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows, elegant but understated. Professional. The kind of vehicle that didn't draw attention but commanded respect. She'd seen it before. Never in the same place twice, but often enough to recognize it. Outside her workplace. Near her apartment building. Once, parked across from the coffee shop while she'd been inside ordering. Amanda kept walking, her pace steady, her shoulders square. She didn't stop. Didn't look directly at the car. Didn't acknowledge what she knew with absolute certainty. Someone was watching. Not the way Steve had watched, obsessive, controlling, suffocating. This was different, distant, protective, like a guardian who'd promised safety and meant it. Amanda felt no fear as she passed the sedan, only a strange sense of peace. She was being protected, still, even now, and she knew exactly who sat behind that tinted glass. Inside the car, Carl watched Amanda walk past, her green coat darkening with rain, her head held high. She didn't glance at the car, didn't hesitate, just moved through the world with a confidence that had been systematically stripped from her and was now, slowly, being rebuilt. Marcus sat in the driver's seat, quiet and observant. She knows we're here. Yes, Carl said simply. And she's not scared. No. Carl's voice carried something close to satisfaction. She's not. They'd been doing this for 6 weeks. Quiet surveillance. Perimeter protection. making sure Amanda's new life remained undisturbed by ghosts or threats or anyone who might mistake her healing for weakness. Steve Gilmore's disappearance had made the news briefly. A successful lawyer who'd apparently suffered a breakdown and vanished. His mother had held a tearful press conference. His law firm had released a statement expressing concern. The police had investigated and found nothing. Within 3 weeks, the story had faded. Within 6, it was forgotten. Steve Gilmore had been erased so completely that even his absence left no mark. How much longer? Marcus asked. Carl watched Amanda turn a corner, vanishing from sight. Until she doesn't need us anymore. And if that day never comes? Carl's expression remained calm, but something ancient and protective flickered in his dark eyes. Then this street is never empty. But she deserves the chance to find out she doesn't need protection. That she's strong enough on her own. You think she is? I know she is. Carl's voice held absolute certainty. She survived Steve Gilmore. She survived years of systematic abuse. She survived the belief that she deserved it. That makes her stronger than most people will ever need to be. Marcus started the engine. Where to? Back to the Emerald Room. Let the night shift take over. As they pulled away from the curb, Carl took one last look at the street where Amanda lived. Warm light glowed from apartment windows. A cat watched from a fire escape. The saxophone player's music drifted on the rain. Normal, peaceful, safe, exactly as it should be. Amanda's apartment, that night. Amanda stood at her window, towel drying her hair, watching the rain paint patterns on the glass. Her apartment was small but hers. Cozy, filled with things she'd chosen, plants, books, a painting of Lake Michigan she'd bought from a street artist. No expensive furniture that Steve had selected to impress guests. No strategically placed objects designed to showcase wealth. Just comfortable, lived-in spaces that welcomed her home each night. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, her best friend who'd slowly, carefully, come back into her life after Amanda had reached out 3 weeks ago. Movie night Friday? My place. I'll make popcorn, and you can tell me about this mysterious promotion you've been holding out on. Amanda smiled and typed back. Deal. I'll bring wine. Real plans. Real friendship. Real life. She set down her phone and noticed something on her doorstep when she glanced through the peephole. A small package wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Amanda opened the door carefully, retrieved it, and closed all 3 locks. Inside her apartment, she unwrapped the package. A book. First edition of Jane Eyre, her favorite novel from college. The one she'd mentioned once, to Luis the bartender at the Emerald Room when she'd told him about Lucia's lilies. No note, no card. Just the book. Amanda ran her fingers over the embossed cover and understood. Carl was still watching, still protecting, but giving her space to heal. Space to become herself again. Space to discover that she was strong enough to walk through rain without fear. She placed the book on her nightstand, next to the stargazer lilies that had mysteriously appeared last week. Thank you, Amanda whispered to the empty apartment, knowing somehow that the words would reach their intended destination. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The city breathed. Life moved forward. And on Amanda's street, a black sedan sat parked 3 blocks away, headlights off, engine running, watching over a woman who was finally learning to sleep without nightmares. Carl Alfano had made a promise 15 years ago, standing at his sister's grave. No one touches what's defenseless, not if I can see it. He'd kept that promise with Amanda. Would keep it for as long as she needed it kept. And when she finally no longer needed protection. When she walked through the world with shoulders squared and hands steady and fear nothing but a distant memory, Carl would fade into the myth he'd always been. The protector in the shadows. The monster who hunted monsters. The man who'd built an empire on violence, but used it to ensure one woman could sleep safely. Not a hero. Never that. Just someone who'd seen the worst of humanity and decided, one person at a time, to stand against it. Amanda turned off her lights and went to bed. And for the 72nd night in a row, she slept through until morning.
Thanks so much for watching till the end. If this story moved you, you're going to love what's coming next. It's even more surprising and emotional than this one. Go ahead and click the story on your screen right now, and see you in the next story.